Imagine a CEO or the boss of a company telling his prospective customers to hold their horses and not spend much. Shocking, isn't it? Well, billionaire and founder of e-commerce behemoth Amazon, Jeff Bezos, had exactly this advice for customers. As Americans gear up for the holiday season, he urged small businesses and individuals that if they intended to spend on big ticket items this holiday season, they should rather keep those plans on hold. He said, and I quote, if you're an individual considering the purchase of a big screen TV, you might want to hold on to your money and see what transpires. The same is true with a new automobile, refrigerator, or whatever else. Just remove some risk from the equation. Now, the context of Jeff Bezos' comments is very interesting. For one, he's just sacked thousands of people in one of the biggest layoffs that Amazon has ever seen. He is also putting out such signals at a time when there are fears of a global recession. Is that really what Jeff Bezos, as one of the richest people in the world, is saying? That a 4-decade high inflation that Americans are faced with will need them to save money. What about India? How does someone prepare for a global recession? Should consumers look at their wallets a little more closely, defer those big ticket purchases, or is this the time to go all out? To understand the context and the indications from Jeff Bezos' comments, how do you prepare for a global recession? I'm speaking today with M. Govinda Rao, former member of the 14th Finance Commission, Anil Rego, founder and CEO of Right Horizons, with us on the show today. And I'm also speaking with Anand Ladha, founder Invest Aaj for Kal. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the India development debate. Mr. Rao, let me begin with you. And it might seem a little strange that I'm giving so much credence to Jeff Bezos' comments, but after all, he is a man who knows how to make money. He reads the signs, he knows the market, and imagine he is telling his potential consumers, don't be so quick to spend. Do you think it's sound advice?
Well, it is a sound advice as far as Americans go, but it is also going to create some sort of a dampening effect on the demand for the rest of the world. And obviously, the rest of the world, particularly India, at least in the short and possibly even in the medium term, will have to diversify its market. And this trend about increasing tariffs will have to be reversed, because that's a double-edged sword. If you increase, if you reduce the imports, you will also reduce the exports. And more than anything else, possibly moving to the domestic demand situation. In fact, spur the domestic demand, so that India is in a recovery phase. India is also facing a very high inflation rate. Obviously, interest rates are going to go up even now. Not only the interest rates, there will be pressure on the exchange rate with the funds flowing out of the country, because Americans and Europeans and the British are likely to increase their interest rates to fight the unprecedented inflation rate in those countries. So we are faced with a challenge, and high interest rates will have its effect on growth rate later, at least in the medium and longer term.
So let me put it.
At least immediately we will have to start thinking, diversifying, our exports, and more importantly, sort of focus on the domestic market.
Let me put this in a very simple way. The question to you, Mr. Rao: while the world prepares for a global recession, should India worry as much?
Yes, India should worry. Definitely, India should worry. But I mean, export has never been our strong point. But then, you have problems with not only the Western Europe and United States, but you also have problem with China, because China is still in a bad situation. So in fact, China has beaten even the US as our largest trading partner, Then you have the other problems on the current account because of the elevated prices of crude oil. So there will be problems on the external front, but nothing is insurmountable. I mean, you can deal with that, but there will be difficulties. And the one encouraging thing that we see this year is the growth of credit from the commercial banks. The time when we had the double balance sheet crisis is getting over, but at the same time the recovery will be not as fast as we would have liked to have it, because the investment will have to return, because investments have over a period of time fallen. If you really want to increase the growth rate, have a steady growth rate at about 7% for the next 2 years, you need to increase your sort of at the present this thing, you need to increase your saving ratio to somewhere about 32%, and we have somewhere about 28-29% at the moment. Okay. So there are issues of that nature, but there are challenges. But then I think situation is not going to be insurmountable, and then we will be able to handle that.
So, let me bring this down to what it means for our viewers individually, because, and let me start with you, Mr. Rego. We are still seeing revenge buying. In high ticket purchases, there are a lot of Indians who want to spend, people want to spend on expensive holidays, they haven't had the opportunity. Luxury items are doing very well, sometimes more than discretionary items. For Indians right now, is this a time to save or spend?
Yeah, first of all, let me step back and give my perspective of what I think of recession and potential impact on India. What I believe is there's a whole lot of difference between the US and India. The reason is India had a decade of deleveraging the previous decade, okay, and we are sort of coming up from that. Whereas the US had almost like 13 years of some great economic expansion, and we are also seeing interest rates really very high. So I would think that it will play out a little differently between both the markets, and I would not be surprised if India does very well in this decade. Okay, that said and done, it's always good to be prudent, in your personal finance management, because you need to keep some money for a rainy day. Yes, in the short term, with global market and recession, let's say in the US, there will be some rub-off here, especially if you're employed, say, in the technology sectors, etc. You're already seeing some bit of pressure. So I would think it's good to be practical. Buy what you need to buy, and as long as, let's say, your personal finances allow you to, and you have the comfort of doing it, it doesn't impact any of your core goals. After you've kept aside, a little bit of money for emergencies, and let's say, what if like there's a tightness in the job market, or there's a layoff, for example, you're finding the repercussions of what's happening in the US in the same Indian portion of the companies, Indian subsidiaries. So I think it's good to be cautious, but I don't think that we're going to see a very prolonged recession out here. And I think it's nothing to do with whether you're in recession or not. Okay, but maybe go fact check and talk to your somebody who can do your financial planning, review it, and if you're fine, then I think there's no harm in spending.
Mr. Anand, the fact is that a lot of these high ticket spends are also based on how you are feeling, your confidence levels. Some of these are emotional decisions. If you're feeling secure, things are looking up, it pushes you towards spending. And we've had a great festive season. We've seen that right now. Do you think that we need to continue in that leg? And do you think Bezos' advice is not really for us, or is this something that Indian consumers also need to look at very carefully?
Basically,
Anand, that question's for Anand.
Sorry.
Basically, as sure as the spring will follow the winters, in the same way, prosperity and economic growth will follow recession, and it's part of the game. And we have to understand that we have to be always financially prepared for it. See, we have to ensure that recession doesn't get changed into depression for us. Recession is when our neighbor loses his job. Depression is when we lose our job and we don't have emergency fund in place and we don't have proper finances in place. So firstly, as an individual, if you are following basic rules of finances, it's absolutely okay. If you have 6 to 8 months of emergency fund, you need not worry right now. Secondly, as far as making big purchases are concerned, if you are following financial rules, for example, let us take an example of car. If you want to buy a car, if you are following 20:4:10:20 rule, you are sorted. Now, what this rule is, that minimum 20 to at least 40% of the total amount of the car you should pay as down payment. 4 years is maximum EMI time. 10% is the maximum EMI as compared to your monthly salary, which you can afford. And 20% is the total EMI, which should be running on your total salary. So, just like this, if you are maintaining your proper financial rules, I think there is not much worry around. Finally, of lately, we Indians are getting too much worried about US market, but problems of US market need not necessarily be problems of Indian market. Right now, I think around 10 crores people have passport in India, but more than 50 crore people are concerned that what is happening in US. It's okay to be aware, but at times overanalysis
then you're not taking into account the fact that Indian companies are also firing. The startup sector is also firing. You've had over the last few days news that Zomato is letting go of people. Before that, Byju's. There are a lot of companies that are letting go of people. It's not like it's not happening and we're living in our own little bubble, is it?
And I totally agree with it. But my only point is worrying too much about market and as far as financial markets are concerned, the day it is announced that we are into recession, market will probably bottom out. All the problems and all the worries which we have is already factored in the market or stock market or financial market for that matter. So we have to follow our financial rules. We have to follow our emergency fund. We have to follow our basic rules while making any big purchases and live happily thereafter. We need not worry too much about recession, and 5 to 10% chances are always there that recession can happen. But for those 5 to 10% chances, we cannot stop everything or every expenditure as of now.
Yes, Mr. Rego, would you like to respond to that? Everything will end happily ever after, according to Anand. Is that Mr. Rao, do you want 1 minute? Mr. Rao, do you want to come in?
Yeah, no, see, the point is technically a recession means a contraction in the economy in 2 successive quarters.
Right.
So, I mean, you need to understand that recession means is not the deceleration. What we are likely to see is a deceleration, and there is no question of recession happening in the near future. I mean, let us understand that very clearly. No. The growth rate this year is expected to be 6.2, 6.5%. But then, of course, the Ministry of Finance says it is going to be about 7%. Now, this might come down. I mean, there is already an expectation that this is likely to be lower next year. But it is not going to be negative. See, contraction in the economy is not taking.
No, absolutely. Your point is well taken.
Okay.
The recession fears are in the US, in
there
UK.
There is no fear of recession. We need to know that.
Sure, sir. Point taken. Point taken. I think Anant is speaking.
Economy will continue to expand.
Yeah.
The point that I am trying to make is that economy is not going to contract is not going to expand. Not as much as we would have liked to. Absolutely. So we don't have to be very concerned about, sort of in that sense of the term. Unlike in the case of Europe or United States, it's not that we are going to expand, but there are certain sectors which are very highly globalized. Technology sector, for example, or many of the, after all, we live in a globalized world. So there would be a certain amount of spillovers that will happen. There will be some, some employment effect will take place, but by and large, I think it's not going to impact very severely on India. Whether we are going to live happily thereafter, is something which has to be seen, because my own feeling is that unless the level of saving goes up, level of saving and investment goes up, and the government will have to work on that. unless the level of saving and investment goes up, the growth rate is not going to pick up. Ultimately, expansion in the economy will have to translate itself into creation of employment, and that will have to happen. And I think in the next 2-3 years there is going to be slower growth, but then with the appropriate policy responses, particularly now because inflation is there and the interest rates are going to go up, and that is going to dampen the investment climate. So that's, these are all interrelated things.
Absolutely.
But I think
I'm glad to clear that up, Mr. Rao, because understandably yes sir, it is the US.
In about 6 months' time, things are likely to settle down, and thereafter the things will be better.
All right. Now, thank you for that. Clearly, we are not going to go through a recession. The US and Europe and UK are fears of a recession. We talked about a global recession at the outset of the show. The point I'm trying to make, and what we're trying to give our viewers a perspective on, is that should you in any way prepare for this global recession? We have to understand how much the impact is going to be on us. Should discretionary spends be postponed or better budgeted for, is the question. And Mr. Rego, look at it. We're going to go into a peak travel time. You look at the prices and the costs of travel and holiday this time round. I think the demand and the prices are the highest ever in the last few years. What is the kind of planning you need to do that? Because people also have a pent-up demand. They haven't been able to do much for the last few years.
Okay, so I'm just trying to say a few perspectives and maybe a little different. My point is, first, I don't expect a recession like the US, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to markets, you may still find some bit of volatility. I don't think markets, price and everything, you will see it in the future if there's a turn in direction, and that is something that one will be watchful for. And coming to your point of, yes, it's good to be budgeting, right? And I think it's very, very important because there could be certain sections of the economy which are impacted. And the point you made about Zomato, for example, and some of the others, on exiting employees, that is a little more to the private equity and some of those sectors which are impacted. We have a large domestic oriented sector which was benefiting from all, the manufacturing and the automobiles, etc. should see some good growth and expansion. So I would believe that there could be a difference between sectors, and the ones inward focused may be a little better. So if you are on the technology side or in startups, etc., I think it's very, very important to tighten your seatbelts and be cautious, assume the worst and budget for it. And if you can still, spend, then why not?
So look at where you are and whether that advice works for you or not. Anand, do you think that that's fair? That's a fairer and more pragmatic assessment. That don't just assume everything is going to be great because you're sitting in India.
No, my first point, which I started my discussion with, was that you have 6 to 8 months of emergency fund in place, and then you are not worrying about recession. So you have to hope for the best if you are progressive in nature, but prepare for the worst. For preparing for that worst, we need that emergency fund in place. We need basic financial rules in place. We need to ensure that we are not over leveraging or taking too much excess credit. So we need to always make sure that we are always preparing for the worst case scenario, and we are sorted for that. If we are prepared for that worst case scenario, then any recession on any difficult time won't lead to depression for us, which is very much important.
Absolutely. We have to prepare for the worst, but be optimistic because you might be better off. So Jeff Bezos' advice, net doesn't apply to you directly right now. Would you agree with that, Mr. Rao? We can go ahead and buy our TVs if we can afford it.
You should go and buy your TV if you can afford it. Ultimately the growth has to take place. Aggregate demand has to be, is extremely important for the economy to survive. And those who, that's what I started first, basically saying that, you do need to, you need to diversify into a domestic demand situation, and those who can afford it can certainly do it. And of course, there is a lot of policy response that is required from the government, because we have possibly one of the highest fiscal deficits and the debt hangs over on us. Sort of states plus centers. Even now, the fiscal deficit, last year it was almost 13% of GDP. Now it will be about 9.5%, 6.4 plus another 3% from the states. And so the government will have to create a fiscal space, which basically means that on the one hand it has to generate sufficient revenues, on the other, a whole lot of other sort of subsidies and transfers will have to be sort of cut down, and it's sort of taking away from the financial savings from the sector, saving sector, and it should leave but less. It should take less, so that private sector is left with greater amount of financial savings which they can borrow, and then obviously the interest rates can be kept unchecked, because that's important. Interest rates are very important for the private sector too. So it's not a bad idea at all. And then certainly, if you are planning to go for a domestic holiday or planning to buy a car, please go ahead and do it. And then this is the time to do it if you can afford it.
All right. So, do your bit and actually spend for the economy.
Yeah.
Think about it. It's good for your economy. We are a consumer-driven economy. If you can afford it, don't do things where you're buying luxury, expensive items, say on loan, or where you can't really afford it. Have your basics in place, and then, well, if you can afford to, think of it as a national duty to contribute to the economy of a consumer-driven society. Well, thank you so much to all of you for joining us in this conversation and putting into perspective Jeff Bezos' very, very interesting comments. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.